There's a $600 trillion market sitting under the global economy, a market so large, so tangled, and so misunderstood that even Wall Street pretends not to see it. Most Americans have never heard of it. Even many professionals can't explain it. Yet it quietly dictates the fate of your bank, your retirement, and the value of the dollar in your pocket. In 2008, when this market was only $60 trillion, it nearly erased the modern financial system. Governments had to unleash $29 trillion in emergency rescue measures just to keep the lights on. And even then, the system cracked. Warren Buffett saw it coming decades before anyone else. Back in 2003, he called these instruments financial weapons of mass destruction. He wasn't exaggerating. Today, those same weapons are 10 times larger, more complex, more leveraged, more fragile. So here's the question no one in power wants the public to ask. If a $60 trillion system almost collapsed the world in 2008, what happens when the $600 trillion version starts to break? Most people think this $600 trillion behemoth exists to protect the financial system. That's the official story, the one repeated by regulators, bankers, and politicians for the last 30 years. They claim derivatives make markets safer. They spread risk. They hedge uncertainty. They prevent another 2008. But here's the paradox they never explain. The very tools designed to reduce risk are now the single largest source of risk in the global economy. Because in the hands of megabanks, derivatives don't act like insurance. They act like dynamite. Dynamite wrapped in mathematical formulas, hidden behind complex contracts, and traded at a scale no one can truly measure. After the 2008 collapse, you might expect governments to ban or shrink this market, at least cap its size. Instead, they legalized it, normalized it, and expanded it. The result is a system where risk doesn't disappear, it gets multiplied, stacked, layered, then disguised behind reassuring language like hedged exposure and net neutral. But history shows what happens when the fuse gets long enough. This isn't conspiracy, it's history. The safety net has become the fuse, and the fuse is now hundreds of trillions of dollars long. To understand how a $600 trillion system became the world's most dangerous blind spot, we have to go back to the moment it first cracked, long before it grew into today's monster. But first, we need to understand the creature itself. 3. What derivatives really are. A derivative sounds complicated, but the idea is brutally simple. It's a bet, a contract whose value is derived from something else. That something else can be anything: a stock, a bond, an interest rate, a currency, a barrel of oil, even the weather. And here's the part that bends reality. You don't have to own the thing you're betting on. Imagine buying insurance on your neighbor's house, a house you don't own, don't live in, and don't care about. If it burns down, you get paid. That's a derivative. And in the right hands, it's harmless. Farmers use futures to lock in crop prices. Airlines use swaps to protect against oil spikes. Companies hedge against currency swings. But the market isn't dominated by farmers and airlines. It's dominated by banks making leveraged bets on interest rates, credit, and currencies using borrowed money. And that's where the danger begins. A bank can enter a $100 million swap contract while posting only $1 million as collateral. That's 100-to-1 leverage. A 1% move against them, the collateral is gone. A 2% move, they owe money they don't have. Multiply that by thousands of contracts across dozens of banks, linked through hundreds of counterparties, and you have a powder keg, one tiny spark away from ignition. 3B 2008. When $60 trillion nearly ended everything, the world still talks about the housing bubble. But housing wasn't big enough to break the global system. Derivatives were. Derivatives took subprime mortgages, toxic loans given to people who couldn't afford them, and turned them into safe securities. AAA rated, guaranteed, insured. At least, that's what the banks claimed. Then, behind closed doors, they used credit default swaps to bet on those same mortgages. Not just once, but again and again. Insurance layered on top of insurance on top of insurance. When the mortgages started to fail, the bets exploded, and two giants walked straight into the blast zone. Lehman Brothers, the first detonation on paper, Lehman looked stable, $639 billion in assets, $613 billion in liabilities, but buried in the footnotes was a number that should have terrified the world, $35 trillion. That was Lehman's notional derivative exposure, a web of interest rate swaps, credit bets, currency bets, all tied to counterparties across the globe. When housing prices started falling, those derivative values fell with them. Counterparties demanded more collateral. Lehman didn't have it. By September 2008, no institution would trade with them. Trust evaporated. Liquidity died. Lehman collapsed. But the real danger wasn't Lehman's failure, it was the shockwave. Every bank connected to Lehman suddenly faced losses they never modeled, never prepared for, never believed could happen. The entire interbank network froze overnight. A single failure nearly collapsed the global economy. AIG, the second, bigger explosion. AIG was even more shocking. This was a $1 trillion insurance titan, a company older than the Great Depression, a company everyone assumed was too conservative to blow up. But behind the scenes, its financial products division had made one of the deadliest mistakes in corporate history. They sold $500 billion in credit default swaps. Insurance on mortgage securities. Insurance they thought they'd never have to pay. When mortgages collapsed, AIG owed tens of billions instantly. Then came something worse, a credit downgrade, triggering immediate collateral calls they couldn't meet. The US government stepped in with $85 billion. Then another wave until the total bailout hit $180 billion, the largest in history. But here's the darkest part. The AIG bailout wasn't to save AIG. It was to save the banks that bought derivatives from AIG. Banks like Goldman Sachs 12, 9B Merrill Lynch 6, 8B Bank of America, and Deutsche Bank. Billions more taxpayer money was funneled through AIG straight into Wall Street. 3C, the true cost of saving a $60 trillion market. To stop the meltdown, governments and central banks unleashed $700 billion in TARP, $4 trillion in Federal Reserve money, printing $25 trillion in global guarantees, and bailouts total $29 trillion, nearly twice the size of the U.S. economy at the time. And all of it, was required to stabilize a derivatives market that was just $60 trillion. The system survived, barely, but instead of dismantling the weapon that almost destroyed everything, Wall Street built a bigger one. The 2008 meltdown wasn't an accident. It wasn't a once-in-a-century storm, and it wasn't a housing crisis. It was the latest chapter in a repeating pattern, a cycle that stretches from the fall of long-term capital management in 1998, to the collapse of Lehman in 2008, to the fragile, over-leveraged system we're living under today. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And once you understand it, you'll understand why the next crisis is inevitable and far bigger than the last. For Step 1, complexity, the illusion of control. Every financial disaster begins the same way, with people who believe they're smarter than risk. In the late 1990s, Wall Street created exotic derivatives based on models so complex only FADS could understand them. In the 2000s, they layered mortgage securities into bundles, then rebundled the bundles, then insured the bundles of bundles. Today, we have derivatives of derivatives, options on credit default swaps, swaps on indexes of other swaps, mathematical pyramids built on top of moving targets. Each layer adds complexity. Each layer multiplies risk. Each layer hides what sits underneath. What begins as a simple hedge becomes a hall of mirrors. 4B Step 2. Bridge betting with money you don't have. Then comes the leverage. Always the leverage. LTM in 1998 used 1:1 leverage on trades it claimed were risk-free. A decade later, banks use the same ratios on mortgage derivatives. Today, the same leverage exists inside hundreds of trillions of interest rate swaps. One wrong move, one unexpected rate change, collateral evaporates instantly. Losses multiply faster than models can calculate. With derivatives, a 1% market move can wipe out firms worth billions. A 2% move can wipe out countries. 4C Step 3. Concentration, all eggs in 4 mega baskets. After complexity and leverage comes the most dangerous step of all: concentration. In 1998, the risk was concentrated in one fund, LTM. In 2008, it was concentrated in a handful of banks: Lehman, AIG, Merrill, Citi. Today, over 90% of all U.S. derivatives sit inside just for institutions. JP Morgan, $54 trillion. Citibank, $48 trillion. Goldman Sachs, $47 trillion. Bank of America, $37 trillion. Combined, $186 trillion, nearly double the entire global economy. If even one of these institutions miscalculates, the blast radius circles the planet. 4D Step 4. Opacity. No one knows who owes what. Here's the part that keeps regulators awake at night. No one knows who owes whom. Not truly, not fully, not even the banks themselves. Derivatives are traded over the counter, private contracts, hidden from public view. One bank hedges with another. That bank hedges with the third. The third hedges with the first. A circular dependency, a spiderweb of obligations. As long as every link holds, the system appears stable. But when one link snaps, no one knows how far the cracks spread. That's why Lehman's collapse froze global credit in hours. No one could tell who was safe, so everyone became unsafe. 4E Step 5. Socializing the losses. Taxpayers to the rescue. And here comes the final step, the moment the public learns the truth. When the bets go bad, the banks don't absorb the losses. The losses get transferred, shifted, dumped onto taxpayers. It happened with LTM. It happened with AIG. It happened with Lehman. It happened with every major bank connected to them. Because every time, the government repeats the same line: too big to fail. But this time, there's a new line, one far more accurate: too big to save. The pattern never ended. Complexity, leverage, concentration, opacity, socialized losses. Add them together, and you don't get a financial system. You get a ticking device made of mathematics and denial. A device that didn't shrink after 2008. A device we expanded. A device now wired into a $600 trillion network that touches every bank, every pension, every government bond on earth. They built it. We inherited it, and the pattern never ended. The pattern didn't stop in 2008. It evolved. It scaled. And today, every piece of it is bigger, faster, and far more dangerous. If 2008 was the dress rehearsal, 2025 is the opening act. 5. A system now 10 times larger. Back in 2008, the derivatives market was about $60 trillion. Dangerous, yes, but survivable with enough political will, enough emergency lending, and enough taxpayer sacrifice. Today, it's over $600 trillion, 6 times the size of the entire global economy. Let that sink in. The world produces around $100 trillion a year, but banks are trading contracts worth 6 times that amount, often backed by nothing more than promises, models, and assumptions. Breakdown of this market in 2025. $500 plus trillion in interest rate derivatives, $50 trillion in credit derivatives, $100 trillion in currency derivatives. These aren't just big numbers. They're fault lines running underneath every major institution on earth. And here's the part the public never hears. Banks didn't simplify after 2008. They made derivatives more complex. They built derivatives of derivatives, options on swaps, swaps on indexes of swaps. A pyramid with no foundation, expanding faster than regulators can even read the reports. 5B. The 4 banks holding the fuse in the U.S. 90% of derivative exposure sits inside 4 megabanks. JP Morgan, $54 trillion. Citibank, $48 trillion. Goldman Sachs, $47 trillion. Bank of America, $37 trillion. Total, $186 trillion. Nearly double global GDP. And their defenders always repeat the same reassuring phrase: don't worry, these positions are hedged. Lehman said the same. AIG said the same. Every collapsed institution in history said the same right before the hedges failed and the models broke. A hedge only works if the counterparty survives. If one megabank falls, the other 3 instantly inherit the blast. This isn't stability. It's a circular firing squad. 5. See the triggers already flashing red. All the ingredients for a derivatives detonation are already in motion. Not theoretical, not hypothetical, visible, present, active. Trigger 1. Violent interest rate swings from near zero in 2021 to over 5% by 2023, the fastest rate shock in 40 years. Over $500 trillion in derivatives depend on interest rates staying stable. But the Fed just swung rates like a wrecking ball. Banks took losses. Some were visible. Silicon Valley Bank, Signature, First Republic. Most were hidden inside derivative books. They're not required to mark to market. If the Fed raises again, things break. If they cut sharply, other things break. If they flip-flop, everything breaks. Trigger 2. Commercial real estate implosion. Over the next 24 months, more than $2 trillion in commercial mortgages must be refinanced at interest rates triple what they were originally. Many properties won't qualify. Defaults will spike. And when they do, credit default swaps tied to commercial mortgage-backed securities, a market around $600 billion, will trigger payouts banks can't afford. Trigger 3. Europe's fragile banks. Credit Suisse collapsed in March 2023. Deutsche Bank, holding over $40 trillion in derivatives, has faced repeated solvency scares. A failure in Europe doesn't stay in Europe. Through derivatives, it lands directly on U.S. balance sheets. Trigger 4. Sovereign debt time bombs. Japan carries government debt equal to 260% of GDP. China's local government debt exceeds $13 trillion. With real estate 30% of its economy in collapse. A crisis in Japanese bonds or Chinese real estate doesn't just hurt Asia. It detonates credit and currency derivatives around the globe. The present looks exactly like the past, just bigger. The same leverage, the same hidden risks, the same assumptions, but now wired into a system that's 10 times larger and far too large for any government or central bank to rescue. The pattern didn't return. It never stopped. And 2025 is the closest parallel to 2008 the world has ever seen. It's easy to hear numbers like $600 trillion and think, that's a Wall Street problem. That's a government problem. That's a banker problem. But here's the truth most documentaries never say out loud. When a derivative system blows up, it doesn't hit Wall Street first. It hits you. Not abstractly, not theoretically, not in a distant, economic textbook kind of way. It hits your paycheck, your savings, your retirement, your ability to live a normal life. 6. When a bank fails, your money freezes. When a megabank fails under derivative losses, it doesn't collapse cleanly. It doesn't politely close at PM. It doesn't give you 72 hours to withdraw funds. It freezes instantly. Your checking account, locked. Your savings account, locked. Your debit card, declined. Your direct deposit, suspended. Because the moment a bank is forced into receivership, the first move is always the same. Freeze withdrawals to stop a bank run. And if multiple banks fail at once, which is exactly what derivatives trigger, the freeze spread system-wide. That's not theory. That's exactly what happened to millions of people in Cyprus 2013, Greece 2015, Lebanon 2019, 2025. The same mechanics apply in the United States, just bigger and faster. 6b. Credit cards and payments stop working. When banks stop trusting each other, the entire payment system seizes up. Visa, MasterCard, Zelle, ACH transfers all rely on banks settling debts with each other behind the scenes. If that system breaks, even temporarily, everyday life breaks with it. Groceries, gas, bills, rent. A modern society runs on digital money, and digital money runs on interbank trust. Derivatives are the thread connecting those banks. If the thread snaps, the fabric tears. 6c. Your retirement takes the first direct hit. This is the part that almost no one in the public understands. Pension funds and retirement accounts are loaded with derivatives. Not because they want to gamble, but because Wall Street sold derivatives as hedges, risk reducers, stability enhancers. The same pitch they gave before 2008. But here's the brutal truth. When a counterparty fails, a hedge becomes a hole right where your future was supposed to be. Public pensions, corporate pensions, 401k plans, IRAs. In a derivatives meltdown, many would show losses so large that retirement becomes mathematically impossible for millions. Not postponed, not reduced, gone. 60 job loss, supply chains, and the real economy. A derivatives meltdown isn't just a financial crisis. It's a shutdown of credit, and credit is the oxygen of the modern economy. No credit means businesses can't refinance debt, companies can't roll payroll, manufacturers can't buy inventory, supply chains break, layoffs spread, unemployment spikes to levels not seen since the 1930s. This isn't abstract doom. It's the exact path the economy followed in 2008. But this time, the numbers are 10x larger, the system is more interconnected, and the ability to rescue it is gone. 6e, we weren't in the room, but we live with the consequences. Regular Americans didn't build the $600 trillion time bomb. They didn't approve the leverage. They didn't sign the swaps. They didn't gamble the global economy on mathematical models. But when the debt chain snaps, when derivatives fail, when banks freeze, we're the ones who feel it. In our homes, in our jobs, in our savings, in the simple act of buying groceries. We weren't in the room when these bets were written, but we're the ones who inherit the fallout when they go wrong. There's a moment in every documentary when the noise fades, and the truth stands alone. This is that moment. Because after 90 years of financial innovation, 50 years of deregulation, and 15 years of ignoring every warning sign, the world is now sitting on top of a structure that no government can save, no central bank can stabilize, and no politician can explain away. And that truth begins with a single sentence. A $60 trillion derivatives market nearly collapsed the world in 2008, and instead of fixing the core problem, we scaled the same system to $600 trillion. That's the revelation. That's the shadow nobody wants to shine a light on. That's the reason every chart, every bailout, every temporary emergency measure keeps getting bigger. Because the system isn't malfunctioning. It's functioning exactly as built. 7 of the math can't save us this time. In 2008, governments and central banks had options. They printed money. They issued guarantees. They bailed out institutions. They bought toxic assets. They stabilized markets through sheer force. And even then, it cost $29 trillion to contain a $60 trillion problem. So ask yourself, how do you bail out losses that could reach $30 to $60 trillion today? When the US already carries $36 trillion in debt, Japan sits at 260% of GDP, Europe is drowning in deficits, and China's real estate system is collapsing? You can't borrow that much. You can't print that much without destroying the currency. And you can't ask taxpayers to fund the same institutions that caused the disaster. Because this time, the public won't accept it. Policymakers know it. Markets know it. Banks know it. Too big to fail has become too big to save. 7b, a currency crisis is worse than a financial crisis in 2008. The system broke, but the dollar survived. That was the anchor that kept everything from spinning into chaos. But today, the anchor is weakening. The world is diversifying away from the dollar. Reserve currency share has fallen. Central banks are buying record amounts of gold. Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan. BRICS nations are building dollar alternatives. If the Federal Reserve tried to print $10 or $20 trillion to save the derivatives system, the result wouldn't be a recovery, it would be a currency crisis. Inflation worse than 2021 to 2023. A collapse in real wages. A dollar that buys less every week. A public that loses faith in money itself. And once a currency crisis begins, no bailout can reverse it. 7c, the system breaks faster than the response. The Great Depression took years to unfold. Banks failed slowly. Markets crashed in waves. People had time, not much, but time to react. A derivatives cascade doesn't move in years, not months, not weeks. It moves in days, sometimes hours. One bank misses a payment. Counterparties freeze. Clearing houses panic. Margin calls explode. Credit evaporates. Withdrawals stop. And before governments even announce a press conference, The crisis is already global. We've never seen a financial event on this scale. There is no historical parallel, no roadmap, no precedent. All we have is the pattern and the math, and both point in one direction. 7D What comes next depends on understanding. Panic. This isn't a call to fear. It's a call to awareness, to preparation, to finally understanding the system we all live inside. Because once you see the pattern, you can protect yourself from it. History doesn't repeat by accident. It repeats because the average person is kept in the dark, told only the small, safe version of events. But you're not average. You're here. You're learning. You're putting the pieces together. And that's the first step to breaking the cycle. 70 Final Awakening and CTA. Every collapse in history begins the same way, with quiet warnings ignored by the people in charge, and understood only by those willing to look behind the curtain. You've now seen the curtain. You've seen the pattern. You've seen the truth. A $600 trillion system built on assumptions, leverage, and blind trust cannot be saved when it breaks. But you can protect yourself by understanding how money really works, how power really functions, and how financial history always repeats. Until someone breaks the cycle. If this changed how you see the dollar, the banks, or your own financial future, then don't leave it here. Subscribe to Dollar Age, because the truth about money has been buried for decades. And this is where we dig it back up.